July 1969. Apollo 11 hurls into orbit, carrying the men who will walk on the surface of the moon for the first time ever. If successful, this mission will have achieved a goal set forth by John F. Kennedy early in his presidency.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
But Kennedy's poetic dream was balanced by a stern mandate for efficient management.
This decision demands a degree of dedication, organization, and discipline, which have not always characterized our research and development efforts. Means we cannot afford inflated costs of material or talent, or a high turnover of key personnel. New objectives and new money cannot solve these problems unless every scientist, contractor, and civil servant gives his personal pledge that this nation will move forward with the full speed of freedom in the exciting adventure of space.
Hi, I'm Saul Garfunkel, and for all practical purposes, I'll be your host for this series. You know, getting a man to the moon and back is a dazzling achievement, and naturally most of our attention was drawn to the science that made it possible. Breakthroughs in physics, chemistry, and engineering and technology. But when you think about it, there's another side to the lunar landing achievement, a hidden, almost behind-the-scenes side. Somehow, in just 8 years, we moved from a president's vision to an accomplished reality. Getting from those small steps of the early 60s to that giant leap at Tranquility Base was also the product of another science, a branch of mathematics called management science.
So in 1961, designing the management system that would oversee the complex Apollo project was just as important as designing the spacecraft itself. One of the NASA directors instrumental in managing the moonshot was Captain Robert Freitag.
I think the feeling that most of us in NASA shared was, my gosh, now we really have to do it. When you think that the enterprise that we were about to undertake was 10 times larger than any project that had ever been undertaken, like the Manhattan Project, it was a pretty awesome event, but it was a type of thing where we knew that we could break it down into manageable pieces. And if we could get the right people and to get the right arrangement of these people, that it would be possible.
But making Apollo 11 possible was no small task. Moving on, even after the most spectacular failures, relied on having people ready to accommodate and learn from information only available through trial and error.
The real big problem was not any single thing. The real big problem was making a multitude, dozens, hundreds, thousands of little things work perfectly. And they all had to work perfectly at the same time.
Managers at 3 NASA centers, Huntsville, Houston, and Cape Kennedy, shared the responsibility of breaking down the project, each commissioning pieces of work to 10 or 20 major contractors.
And then each of those industrial contractors would break theirs down into maybe 20 to 30 or 50 subcontractors. And they then would break it down into perhaps 300,000 or 400,000 separate pieces, which would end up being a man's job. The total number of people that were around to work on the Apollo was about 400 to 500,000 people, all working for a single objective. But it was so clear what President Kennedy said. He said, I want to have a man landed on the moon safely, return to Earth, and to do it within a decade. And of course, the Congress also said for $20 billion. So you had cost, performance, and schedule, and you knew what the job was in one simple sentence.
Roger, understand. Go for landing.
Even today, we can still share the excitement of the people in mission control when Neil Armstrong stepped onto the surface of the moon, making the pioneering voyage a success.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Underlying the success of the lunar missions were the major concerns of management science, making the operations of an organization, in business, industry, or government, as productive and economical as possible.
2, 1, ignition. Right away, Houston.
These historical achievements depended on replacing seat-of-the-pants approaches with systematic mathematical analysis.
308, your number. Tank coming through 1,500 feet, and H-dot looks good.
Management science, or operations research as it is sometimes called, turned out to be very powerful. It enabled mathematicians to bring to bear a long history of pure research on very practical applied problems. They discovered a set of profound ideas that unify a broad range of seemingly disparate issues. You see, the underlying theme of management science is to find the best method, what mathematicians call the optimal solution. Sometimes we want to find the fastest way to do a job. Sometimes we might want to maximize our profit or minimize our costs. So what we define as optimal depends on our goal.
But whatever the goal, our optimal solution is related to the efficiency and economy of running a complex operation. One of the challenges facing most businesses is scheduling. Here at Eastern Airlines Boston headquarters, approximately 60 flights arrive and depart every day. Each flight has to have a fully serviced airplane, a complete cockpit and cabin crew, and as full a load as possible of passengers and cargo. These elements need to come together properly 60 times each day. Eastern's Manager of Control Operations is Bill Rodenheiser.
Scheduling of personnel, aircraft is the whole bottom line for the airline industry. Everything is scheduled to the minutes. Flight time of the flight crews to the unloading time for the ramp servicemen is all measured and manned in minutes by pounds or minutes by the hour.
Remarkable things can emerge through careful scheduling. For example, say one of Eastern's planes, the DC-9, carries 5,000 pounds of cargo. It takes 3 men 23 minutes to unload. Yet by adding a 4th man to the crew, unloading time is nearly cut in half, to only 12 minutes. When delayed flights compete with regular arrivals for unloading, crew sizes are reshuffled to accommodate the stack-up. The bottom line is this: idle planes don't make any money. That's why Eastern pays close attention to maintenance scheduling.
Manning is geared to the number of minutes of ground time scheduled for that aircraft. This would be adjusted during the off weather or bad weather days or heavy air traffic delays and whatnot. But we're all working under a time frame. There are four various functional departments, and if either of the four cannot fit the time frame, then they will so advise us through their leads or supervisors to the control center, and we'll make an adjustment on that departure time.
You know, it's easy to draw up a schedule to cover all your needs if you have no limitations on resources. But that's never the case in business. And the problem's dramatic in an operation like an airline, where you're dealing with expensive resources, like airplanes, and an obviously limited supply of trained pilots and attendants. But these same two constraints, limited and expensive resources, are part of every business operation. To make a profit, you have to combine economy with uninterrupted service. And for Eastern, that means coming up with an optimal schedule.
Some of the scheduling techniques used by Eastern to keep its fleet of 286 planes in the air 16 hours each day were developed here at Bell Labs. The labs are the research arm of AT&T, but they're also something of a national institution. That's because the wide range of pure mathematics research going on here rivals that of the best universities in the world. Ron Graham, an expert in scheduling and one of the country's most distinguished mathematicians, is director of Bell's Math Science Research Department.
Scheduling is a very interesting area in which you have some number of processors, which you can think of as computers or as people, and you have a number of tasks or jobs that you'd like to get done, and there are various constraints between the jobs. One might think that if you'd like to get done sooner, then by adding more processors to the system, that would guarantee that you'd be done sooner. In fact, just the opposite can happen. It's an example, in a way, of the old adage, too many cooks can spoil the broth, where you can add more machines or decrease the amount of time it takes for each job or relax the constraints between the various jobs. All of those can actually end up taking longer. And to try to understand why that is and how to avoid it, now that's the arena of mathematics.
At Bell, major mathematical concepts have often been conceived for the sake of pure research alone. But time and time again, the math has led to great practical applications, improving computer security, airline operations, and even vacation plans.
A set of mouse ears and a goofy shirt may seem pretty humble when compared to an airplane or to the space program. But one of the points that I'm trying to make is that the techniques of management science are applied in all kinds of different settings.
Over 200 million people have visited Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida, since it opened in October of 1971. With that kind of attendance, Mickey and the people he works with have to be carefully prepared to service properly all of the visitors who cross into the vacation kingdom. One of the trickier customer service problems they have is dealing with the long waiting lines that may develop in front of popular attractions. In the world of mathematics, that waiting line is known as a queue. People form queues all the time, in banks, supermarkets, at the movies. Even machinery forms queues. This line of submarines waiting to drop off and pick up passengers is a queue. Here at Walt Disney World, people form queues to experience their favorite ride. Now, queues can be very frustrating, especially to the people waiting in them, but also to those providing the service. Norm Durgis is the director of the Epcot Center.
How people move around within our parks is very important to us because it is the method in which we deal with their experience. How we do that and how well we do that determines whether or not they enjoy what they do here or go away saying that was difficult. And for Disney, in most cases, our guests go away saying, geez, there seemed to be a lot of people there that day, but I enjoyed it and I didn't have to wait too long and they treated me nice and I had a good time. And when we do it right, and we believe we do it right most of the time, then that's the end result, and that's what's important to us.
Contrary to common sense, however, easing these queues is not as simple as adding a few more employees to the backed-up areas. It would certainly help in some instances, but to better understand how to solve a queuing problem, we also need to look at the nature of the queue people are forming. Would it be better to have one line in a first-come, first-served policy, like we're accustomed to seeing in a bank? Or how about having more than one queue, which is pretty common in supermarkets, and allowing customers to choose which checkout line they want to join? Well, the question then becomes, how many lines or queues should there be to provide an acceptable level of customer service? At Walt Disney World, exactly how long is the average person willing to wait in a queue?
30 minutes.
If I were alone, I'd wait 45 minutes. If I was with the kids, I wouldn't wait at all.
How about you?
Depends on the ride, but for some of the rides, I'd be willing to wait a half an hour, 45 minutes. No, I don't care how long it takes, because I like all the rides.
45 minutes tops, 30 minutes ideally.
Walt Disney World gathers extensive research data as well as customer opinion when developing a computer model to simulate customer behavior and traffic patterns throughout the park.
We watched them and we would measure what they did. We knew how long they spent going on the attractions, how much time they spent eating, how much time they spent making decisions, and how much time they spent taking care of their personal needs. And then as attendance increased, we would continue to monitor that. And as lines grew, we'd see how long people would wait in a line for a specific style of attraction. In some cases, they'd only wait maybe 5 or 10 minutes. In other cases, on the very popular attractions, maybe 2 or 3 hours. And then putting all of that data together gives us the ability to build this computer model and to start locating attractions and restaurants and all of these exciting things in different areas, interconnecting them with pathways, and then with this model, simulate where people are going to go and how the lines are going to form. And then that gives us the ability to start making decisions about design. Very, very important, of course, because that controls the capital cost of a project. We want not to over-design something. We could not afford to do that. On the other hand, we don't want to under-design things and create big wait times that are unnecessary and unpleasant for people to experience.
Knowing that the people at Disney World are worried about how much time I spend waiting in line is a pretty comforting notion. And now that I'm back from vacation, I'm going to try to be more patient the next time I'm part of a queue.
Sir, may I help you?
Yeah, I want to return this car that I picked up in Orlando, Florida when I was vacationing at Disney World. People in the office there said it was okay to drop it up here in Boston.
Okay, no problem. You're all set. Thank you.
Thank you. Have you ever wondered how a car rental agency like Avis can let you pick up a car in one city and drop it off in another? I mean, how do they maintain the proper number of cars in a lot if the car that I picked up in Orlando winds up here in Boston? I mean, doesn't that make Orlando a short one and Boston with an extra? You see, the problem facing Avis has a history of mathematical investigation and is traditionally known as the transportation problem.
Here's a graphic representation of the problem. Let's take 4 cities, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Los Angeles. There's been a lot of cross-country traveling by rental cars, so we'll say that at the end of the week, New York has 3 more cars than it's supposed to have, Philadelphia has 1 less, Chicago has 2 more, and Los Angeles is 4 shy of the number it began with. Now, it's clear that Chicago and New York's extra cars need to be returned to LA and Philly, so someone has to make sure that the cars are transported as efficiently and cheaply as possible. But in what combination should they be returned? Should one of New York's extras be sent to Philadelphia, or should all of them be shipped to LA? And what about Chicago? How should we smooth out our car surplus there?
Well, it turns out that finding a fairly good solution to this particular problem doesn't require a lot of mathematical sophistication. But you'll need to study it for a while and play with some numbers in order to figure out an economical way of returning the cars. And imagine how complicated our transportation problem becomes if we're dealing with combinations of 10 cities, or 50, or 100. Well, you could try to figure it out by trial and error, but your chances of stumbling on an accurate solution are awfully remote. Enter management science. Remember, its special goal is finding the best possible solution to a problem. That process is known as optimization because it seeks an optimal answer. In the real world of a car rental agency, the difference between a good solution and the optimal solution can turn out to be a whole lot of money. Now, there are well-established mathematical techniques that have been devised to tackle problems like this, to find an optimal solution to the transportation problem, which is a special case of linear programming. Now, the most common method has been perfected over the past 20 years.
It's called the simplex method. Even when a problem has hundreds of variables, the simplex method relentlessly seeks the optimal solution. And things haven't stopped there. Very recently, a new approach to linear programming was announced.
An elimination theorem that allows you to derive information about the optimum even before reaching it. So the application of this to
It may not surprise you to learn that its young developer, Narendra Karmakar, is a mathematician in Ron Graham's department at Bell Labs. Although it'll be some time before the true value of the new method becomes known, mathematicians now believe it holds great promise. Furthermore, it illustrates the point that mathematics research continues to have implications for practical management problems.
Before I went away to Florida, this Store 24 wasn't even built yet. Now it's open and seems to be enjoying a pretty healthy business. When the construction and the grand opening of a new store go smoothly, you take it all for granted and start shopping there. But it must take a lot of planning to get a store built, stocked, and operating in just 14 short weeks.
All other permits have been applied for. We normally wait 6 weeks ahead of time, but we got a jump start on this one also for all other applications.
The people in this room are attending a new store committee meeting. Twice a month, these Store 24 executives discuss ways to make building and opening stores more efficient.
We'll have the shelving set up probably at least a week before the store is ready to open. And then you'll have your vendors scheduled to come in at that time.
We'll get in our major vendors, particularly the soda coolers and equipment that I need, the heavy equipment in before the groceries. That way they're not trying to shuffle around all this product.
Store 24's vice president in charge of properties is Richard Nilo.
We look at a 14-week schedule, essentially. And during those 14 weeks, the construction manager here will actually work with the outside contractor and sit with him on a very tight schedule to make sure that this tradesman is going to be here on Tuesday and will be leaving by Wednesday morning, because it's a domino effect. The next tradesman is waiting for him to go so he can come in and do what he's supposed to do, and everybody else down the line is waiting for this schedule to be completed.
With this critical path method of management, Store 24 can work on several things at once, using staff and resources as efficiently as possible. The goal of critical path is to get from the beginning to the end of a project in the shortest possible time, while successfully completing all the tasks in between.
It's very important, we feel, to get a store open as quickly as possible. It's ultimately, we're paying rent on the location, and we're paying all the other expenses that go along with carrying the location. So everyone's been told that a new store takes priority over most other work in the company, and to get that new store open during that 14-week period is something that everybody has as a goal.
Starting with a pile of bricks and finishing up with an open and running 24-hour convenience store is clearly a pretty complicated matter of scheduling, using resources, and marketing. One of the ways to think about the critical path method is as a management tool, which helps us to tie together efficient scheduling, economic resource allocation, and reliable distribution. It's typical of the ideas which management science has brought to light, discovering that problems which were thought to be distinct are actually related, and establishing a family of mathematical techniques for solving them. And the applications of those techniques are not limited to corporations like Store 24. They turn out to be useful in planning the public services we all depend on.
On Sunday, October 13th, 1973, the small industrial city of Chelsea was shaken out of a peaceful weekend and into one of the worst fires ever witnessed in Massachusetts. The cause is still unknown, but flames turned 18 city blocks into a smoldering ruin in just 2 short hours. For the first time in United States history, a federal disaster area was declared as a result of a fire. Captain Dennis Williams was one of the men who fought the blaze.
Deputy Chief, arriving on the scene, realized the potential of the fire, the fact that the wind was blowing about 50, 60 miles an hour, and the fact that the fire was spreading from block to block, and he immediately ordered additional alarms. The additional alarms resulted in the bringing into the city a lot of mutual aid. Through the course of the afternoon, from 4 p.m. until 6:30 p.m. that night, we have determined that there were 165 pumpers and 39 other pieces of equipment that responded from over 100 communities. They brought with them about 2,000 firefighters from many places around Massachusetts, parts of New Hampshire, Maine, and Rhode Island.
Now that's a full-fledged disaster, but you frequently hear in a radio news program that firefighters from 5 or 6 surrounding communities have helped to battle a particular blaze. Now we all applaud that kind of municipal cooperation, but people also want to be reassured that their own towns aren't left unprotected.
In other words, the backup system for fire protection has to be planned. Civil defense authorities and mathematicians have to work out well in advance of a particular emergency a scheme whereby certain towns back up other towns without leaving any one area completely exposed if another fire should break out.
We were able to get assistance from far distant points, which normally we may never have obtained so rapidly.
As you can probably guess, planning a schedule for cooperating fire departments is a management science problem. Chelsea, along with 32 other Greater Boston communities, belongs to a mutual aid association called Metro Fire. Whenever one of its member communities has a fire larger than 10 alarms, meaning that at least 40 fire and support vehicles are needed to respond, neighboring fire departments contribute about 1/3 of their on-duty equipment and personnel to fight the blaze. For Metro Fire, coordinating all of this means looking at routes and transportation times to map the most logical and efficient coverage relationship among neighboring fire departments. It also means paying attention in advance to resource limitations like the number of firefighters available in each department the varying types of equipment each town owns, and the probabilities of fire in the communities served by these companies. This is a case where the solution is not something we want to do, but something we hope we won't ever have to use. And it's a concern of the general public, not a private business matter.
All right, lift off and the clock is started.
From Alan Shepard's first suborbital flight to Neil Armstrong's moonwalk, the space program was a public demonstration of scientific skill and mathematical and technological ingenuity. In a less public, but no less central way, it's also been a demonstration of managerial method and administrative acumen. When NASA commissioned the Apollo module, it was asking several hundred companies to design, build, test, and deliver components and systems that had never been built before. But the whole project was controlled by people who were intimately familiar with management science techniques. They relied on the methods of optimization that we've been talking about: scheduling, resource allocation, transportation, critical paths, and queuing. In all of these areas, management science has substituted mathematics for guesswork and hope. It has also given us practical ways to pursue the age-old goal of finding the best solutions to very familiar problems. And as we've seen, the mathematics of management science continues to evolve, carrying with it the promise of new applications in a growing number of settings.